Hey guys, tonight we are slipping back to a time of immense bravery and equally immense ignorance to the mid-19th century, a world lit by gas lamps and torn apart by cannon fire. You are standing on the precipice of the American Civil War, not as a soldier with a rifle, but as something far rarer, and in some ways far more vulnerable, a woman who has decided to become a nurse. You're about to trade your quiet, predictable life for a world of mudblood and disease armed with little more than good intentions. You see the posters, the patriotic fervor, the handsome young men marching off to glory. But you are headed for the aftermath, the place where that glory comes to be stitched back together, or more often to die. Frankly, your chances of coming through this unscathed are slim. You probably won't survive this experience, at least not the version of you that exists right now. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's always a huge encouragement. And for a bit of fun, I'd love to see where and when you're listening from. So feel free to post your location and local time in the comments below. Now dim. The lights maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 1861. Before this moment, your world has been one of carefully prescribed boundaries. It's a world of needlepoint, of church socials, of helping your mother in the kitchen. Your days are measured out in the scent of baking bread and floor polish. Your most pressing concerns might involve mastering a difficult piano piece or avoiding your great aunt's notoriously terrible fruitcake at Christmas. Your hands, soft and uncalloused, are skilled in darning socks and arranging flowers. War is something you read about in history books, a distant and vaguely noble affair involving men in powdered wigs. But now it is here. It arrived with the suddenness of a summer thunderstorm, a crack of lightning called Fort Sumter that split the sky and the nation. Suddenly, the quiet hum of your town is replaced by the rumble of marching feet and the constant fervent clang of church bells. Flags seem to sprout from every window and porch railing. There are speeches in the town square full of soaring words like Union, liberty, and destiny. The young men, boys you've known your whole life, are transformed overnight. They stand taller, their chests puffed out in brand new uniforms, their faces alight with a kind of terrible, beautiful excitement. They are going off to an adventure, a righteous crusade that everyone agrees will be over by harvest time. And you are watching. You are standing on the sidelines, waving a handkerchief. With the other women, your heart a confusing mix of pride and a hollow sort of dread. You pack lunch pails. For the departing soldiers, you attend rallies, and you join one of the local soldiers' aid societies. You sit in stuffy parlors with other women scraping lint from old linen to make makeshift bandages and knitting socks with a furious energy. Some of the women slip little notes of encouragement into the socks' messages of hope for a boy they'll never meet. But for you, it isn't enough. The feeling of being left behind, of being a passive spectator to the great event of your time, is a constant nagging ache. You want to do something. Not just knit. Not just wait. The idea, when it first takes root, feels radical, almost scandalous. To go to the war. Not as a wife trailing her officer husband, but on your own. To nurse the sick and wounded. The newspapers are filled with calls for aid, but the image they project is one of a sanitized noble calling. It's an illustration of a serene woman in a crisp apron, gently dabbing a handsome soldier's forehead with a cool cloth. He, of course, looks dashingly pale but is on the swift road to recovery. Spoiler alert, it's mostly mud, and nothing is crisp for more than 5 minutes. Still, the idea holds you. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for most female nurses was patriotism, a desire for personal independence, or simply economic necessity in a time of crisis. For you, it's a tangled knot of all three. You love your country, yes, but you also yearn for a life of purpose that is larger than the four walls of your family home. You want your existence to mean more than a well-kept house and a future of respectable marriage. This war, this terrible, awful war, is paradoxically an opportunity. It is a door creaking open into a world of consequence. So, you make your decision. You announce it to your family. The reaction is likely one of stunned silence, followed by a flurry of worried protestations. It's not a woman's place. It's dangerous. It's improper. What will people say? You are steadfast. Your resolve is a new, unfamiliar armor. You write a letter. Perhaps to the formidable Dorothea Dix, the newly appointed superintendent of Army nurses for the Union, a woman famously seeking nurses who were plain in appearance, over 30, and possessed of a serious maternal disposition to avoid any hint of impropriety. Or perhaps you just write to a local doctor you know is heading toward the camps. There's no formal application process, no HR department to send a resume to. No one hands you a laminated badge and a map of the campus. You simply offer yourself up to the cause, a willing pair of hands. Against all odds, you are accepted. Or perhaps more accurately, you are simply not turned away. The need is too great. You pack a single small trunk. What do you bring to a war? A few sturdy dresses of dark practical wool, sensible shoes, a Bible, your sewing kit now destined for far more than household repairs. You look at your reflection, the familiar face of a woman whose greatest adventure was a trip to the county fair, and you wonder who you will be when you next see it. The journey itself is the first assault on your romantic notions. You travel by train, the carriages overflowing with loud, boisterous recruits, their bravado barely masking their fear. The air is thick with the smoke of cheap cigars and unwashed bodies. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels on the track is a countdown to a future you cannot possibly imagine. This is not the noble procession of a national hero. It's a chaotic, dirty, and profoundly uncomfortable migration toward a storm. And as you finally disembark, taking your first steps into the sprawling, messy reality of a military encampment, the first thing that greets you is not the sight of heroes, but the smell. It is a thick, complex miasma of mud, sweat, wood smoke latrines, and underneath it all, a faint coppery tang that clings to the back of your throat. This is the scent of your new home. Your glorious calling has begun. That smell you first noticed, that complex foul perfume of humanity under duress, only intensifies as you are led past rows of tents and toward a large commandeered building. It could be a church, a tobacco barn, or a courthouse. Whatever its former life, it is now simply a place for the wounded. There is no gentle orientation, no welcome speech. Your welcome packet is a stern look from an overworked surgeon and a mumbled command to a steward. Find her something to do, and tell her not to faint where she'll be in the way. You're pointed toward a set of double doors, and you push them open, stepping into your new classroom. And it is a classroom of a sort. Your education is about to begin. There are no textbooks, no lectures, no nursing schools as you would know them. In 1861, formal training for nurses is virtually non-existent in America. Your curriculum, is the cacophony of groans that greets you. Your first lesson is the sight of dozens, perhaps hundreds of men lying on straw pallets or crude cots packed so closely together you can barely walk between them. The air is thick enough to taste a hot, humid blend of unwashed bodies, stale blood, and human waste. Before you can even process the scene, a man with a missing arm and a fever-bright gaze grabs your skirt. His voice is a dry rasp. "Water," he begs. "Please." You freeze for a second, a deer in the headlights of human misery. Someone shoves a bucket and a dipper into your hands. "Start at the far end," a voice barks. "And don't give them too much, or they'll just vomit it back up." And so, your training begins. You move from man to man, ladling out sips of brackish, lukewarm water. This is your first task, the simple, profound act of giving a drink to the thirsty. But here, it's an assembly line of desperation. You quickly learn that being useful means doing whatever the surgeons and stewards don't have time for. It means emptying slop buckets. It means trying to wash dried blood and filth from woolen uniforms that will never be truly clean again. It means spooning thin, greasy broth into the mouths of men too weak to feed themselves. You thought you would be soothing brows and writing letters, but most of your first days are spent as a laundress, a scullery maid, and a janitor all rolled into one. Your hands, once soft, are quickly becoming raw and chapped from the harsh lye soap and the constant wringing of heavy-soiled linens. In a quiet corner, you might see a small group of women who seem to float through the chaos with an unnerving calm. They wear dark habits and move with a quiet efficiency, their faces serene. These are Catholic nuns, perhaps, from the Sisters of Charity. They are some of the only women in the country with any kind of institutional experience in nursing, and their quiet competence is both awe-inspiring and deeply intimidating. They clean a wound, change a dressing, and murmur a prayer with a practiced rhythm that makes your own clumsy efforts feel like a child playing dress-up. You try to watch them, to imitate their movements, but you feel like a clumsy fraud. Your first real medical task is a terrifying milestone. A surgeon, his apron already stained a gruesome map-like pattern of red and brown gestures, impatiently at a soldier's leg wound. "You," he says, not bothering to learn your name. "This dressing needs changing." He moves on before you can object or ask for instruction. You kneel, your heart hammering against your ribs. You've sewn embroidery before creating delicate flowers with fine silk thread. Turns out the cross-stitch technique doesn't apply to human flesh. Who knew you fumble with the knot on the existing bandage, your fingers thick and stupid? When you finally pull it away, the soiled linen sticks to the wound, and the soldier cries out a thin, sharp sound of agony. You fight the bile that rises in your throat. The wound is a festering, discolored mess, oozing a thick yellowish pus that smells like old meat. You remember reading a popular health book back home on the water cure of fad, which claimed that wrapping a patient in cold, wet sheets could cure almost anything. You have a fleeting, hysterical thought that a brisk wrap is probably not the recommended treatment for this. You do the only thing you can. You mimic what you've seen others do. You clean the area as best you can with a rag and some water from a communal basin. Slap a fresh piece of lint on top and tie a new bandage, your hands trembling. This is your education. It is a brutal hands-on crash course. Historians still argue whether the chaotic hands-on training of volunteer nurses ultimately produce more resilient and practical caregivers, or simply normalize dangerously unhygienic practices that cost countless lives. You don't have time for such academic debates. You're too busy learning the difference between the arterial spurt of bright red blood and the sluggish ooze of a vein. You're learning to identify the sweet, sickly smell of gangrene. You're learning to read a man's fate in the color of his skin and the sound of his breathing. No one teaches you this. You absorb it through your skin, through the pores of your own terror and exhaustion. The trauma is the teacher. The suffering is the textbook. Each dying man is a lesson in the limits of your own strength, a final exam you are forced to take over and over again, day after bloody day. The place they call a hospital is in fact a church. From the outside, it still retains a certain quiet dignity, its white steeple pointing toward a heaven that feels impossibly far away. But the moment you step through the heavy oak doors, that illusion shatters. The sacred has been made profane. The pews have been ripped out, likely broken down for firewood, or crudely fashioned into cots. The soaring space designed for psalms and sermons now echoes with a very different kind of liturgy, the chorus of human suffering. The air, which should smell of old wood hymn books and beeswax, is instead thick with the foul miasma you are coming to know as your constant companion. This is your new home, and its interior decor is early American tragedy with bloodstained accents and a charming aroma of despair. You might be in a church, or you could just as easily be in a tobacco barn, where you're pretty sure the previous tenants, a family of dairy cows, kept the place cleaner. It could be a grand southern manor, its ballroom floor, now slick with things you don't dare identify in the dim light. Or it might be a sprawling city of canvas tents flapping endlessly in the wind, freezing in the winter, and suffocatingly hot in the summer. Whatever the structure, the reality inside is the same. It is a container for pain. Let's focus on the floor for a moment. It's made of wide wooden planks with dark gaps between them. It's covered in a layer of straw, a feeble attempt at both comfort and sanitation. The theory is that the straw absorbs the filth and can be swept out and replaced. The reality is that there is never enough clean straw and never enough manpower to do the job properly. So the straw becomes a compressed damp mat of mudblood vomit and discarded bandages. It's a breeding ground for vermin and disease, and every step you take is on this gruesome carpet. At night, you hear the rustling and scratching of rats, bold and well-fed, foraging in the dark. And then there's the air. Ventilation is a concept for a future time. The tall arched windows of your church hospital might be nailed shut to keep out the night chill or the prying eyes of sentries. The only freshness comes from a breeze that also ushers in a thick cloud of flies, which swarm over the wounded with a horrible buzzing indifference. To combat the stench, or the miasma, as the doctors call the bad air, they believe carries disease, they sometimes resort to primitive measures. You might see a steward walking the aisles with a sizzling pan of tar, the acrid smoke filling the space and making your eyes water. More commonly, they use tobacco. Men will be encouraged to smoke their pipes, or bundles of tobacco leaves will be left to smolder in a corner, the heavy sweet smoke thought to purify the air. It does nothing, of course, except add another layer to the olfactory assault. Historians still argue whether the common practice of housing the sick in repurposed public buildings like churches and courthouses provided more psychological comfort due to their familiarity, or simply accelerated the spread of disease through poor ventilation and overcrowding. From your vantage point, kneeling in the filth, the academic debate feels moot. You see men with measles, a simple childhood ailment lying feet away from men with open suppurating wounds. You see a boy shivering with typhoid fever right next to a man recovering from a leg amputation. There is no concept of quarantine. It is a shared ecosystem of pathogens where a soldier who survived a bullet is likely to be killed by the germs of the man in the next cot. And you live here. You do not clock out and go home to a clean bed and a hot meal. Your home is a corner of this hell. Perhaps you have a small cot in a drafty hallway, or you might just have a space on the floor in the linen closet which you share with 3 other women and that family of very bold mice. It's got rustic charm. You eat your meals, standing up a piece of hardtack and some salted meat, your appetite long since vanished. There is no privacy, no silence. You fall into an exhausted sleep for a few hours at a time. But the sounds of the ward are a constant soundtrack. The low, steady moaning, the sudden shouts of a man lost in a delirious nightmare, the wet, ragged coughing that seems to go on for an eternity. You wake up in the morning, not to birdsong, but to the sound of the death carts making their rounds. You are constantly, deeply existentially tired. But there is no respite. This building, this container of misery, is your entire world. It's a prison where the inmates are dying, and you are one of the wardens armed not with keys, but with a water dipper and a dwindling supply of clean bandages. Later in the war, massive purpose-built, pavilion-style hospitals will be designed with airy wards and a focus on ventilation that will save thousands of lives. But you are not there. You are here in the early days of chaos and improvisation, where the walls around you feel less like a sanctuary and more like the inside of a tomb. The normal grinding misery of your hospital has a certain rhythm. It's a rhythm of suffering, yes, but it is predictable. You know the rounds, the chores, the faces. That rhythm is shattered by a sound. It starts as a low, persistent rumble on the horizon, a vibration you feel in the floorboards and in the fillings of your teeth. It's not thunder. It is the sound of cannons. Miles away, 2 great armies are tearing each other to pieces, and you and everyone else in this makeshift hospital stop what you are doing and listen. A tense quiet falls over the wards, a collective holding of breath. Every man here knows that the sound is a promise that soon this place will be flooded. The cannon fire might last for hours, even a whole day. Then an eerie silence. This is the worst part, the waiting. You try to prepare. You tear more linen for bandages. You check the dwindling supplies of chloroform and whiskey. You boil water that will be cold and contaminated long before it's needed. And then you hear it. The rattle of wagon wheels coming fast. The first ambulance has arrived. The Union Army, in a stroke of organizational genius, has the new Letterman Ambulance Corps. It's a system designed to efficiently retrieve the wounded from the field and bring them to field hospitals like yours. It is in its way a medical marvel. From your perspective, it is a ruthlessly efficient conveyor belt delivering an impossible amount of human wreckage to your doorstep. The back of a horse-drawn wagon is thrown open and the flood begins. 4 men packed in like firewood. Then another wagon and another. They come in a long, unbroken procession. Men stumble out, using rifles as crutches. Men are carried in on stretchers, their comrades' faces grim with exhaustion. Soon every last inch of floor space you thought was occupied is somehow further compressed. The narrow aisles between cots disappear filled with bodies. The space around the altar, once kept clear, is now home to 3 bleeding soldiers. The concept of a bed, becomes a distant luxury. Now it's just about finding a 6-foot patch of filthy floor that isn't already taken. Your role changes in an instant. You are no longer methodically caring for the men in your ward. You are now a human traffic controller for an unending parade of agony, and you're pretty sure that wasn't in the job description you never received. A surgeon, his face a mask of sweat and blood, will grab you by the arm. Quick, this one's bleeding out, press here, don't let up. You press down on a sticky, sodden uniform, feeling the hot pulse of a man's life pouring out beneath your hands. Before you can even register his face, the surgeon is pointing at another. That one's gone. Pull him out to the back. We need the space. You are pulling dead men out of the way to make room for the dying. When the inside of the church is full, the flood spills outside. There's no polite receptionist to tell you the doctor will be with you shortly. The field outside is the waiting room, and there are no magazines. Men are laid on the muddy ground sometimes, with a single blanket beneath them, sometimes with nothing. They are placed under the shade of trees if they are lucky, or out in the baking sun or chilling rain if they are not. They lie there, staring up at the sky, waiting their turn. It's a silent, horrific queue for surgery, for water, for death. You might find a young man, his uniform caked in mud, with a small, neat calling card pinned to his lapel, his name and hometown carefully written out. It was his way of ensuring he wouldn't be lost to the anonymous oblivion of the battlefield, a small act of identity in the face of annihilation. The noise is a physical force. It's louder than a train station, but instead of announcing arrivals and departures, the sounds just announce new and inventive forms of pain. The collective moaning of hundreds of men is a constant bass note punctuated by the sharp screams from the makeshift operating theater and the frantic shouted orders of the surgeons. Historians still argue whether the sheer shocking scale of casualties at battles like Antietam and Shiloh was a greater catalyst for medical innovation than the scientific discoveries that would follow decades later. Standing in the middle of it, you don't feel like you're part of a catalyst for progress. You feel like you're drowning. You lose all track of time. You work through the day, and deep into the night, the only light coming from a few smoky, flickering lanterns that cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, making the scene even more hellish. You rip bandages with your teeth because there's no time to find scissors. You give a dying boy a sip of water, and when you turn back to him, minutes later, he is already cold. You move on. You have to have 24 hours pass, or maybe it's 36. You haven't slept. You haven't eaten. You are operating on a plane beyond mere exhaustion, and still the wagons come. You look at the sea of bodies inside the sprawling field of them outside, and you are struck by a sense of profound, soul-crushing futility. You can save one man, but you have to step over 10 more to do it. This is the brutal mathematics of a Civil War battle, and you are on the losing side of the equation. In the quiet, exhausted days after the battle, a new, more insidious enemy begins to make its presence felt. The thunder of the cannons has faded, but a silent war is being waged in the blood and flesh of every man lying in this ward. You, with your boundless energy and desire to help, are one of its unknowing collaborators. You are fighting an enemy you cannot see, and you are losing badly. That enemy is germs. Of course you don't call them that. The very concept of microscopic organisms causing disease is a fantasy, a notion for a future you will never see. In your world, sickness comes from miasma, a foul vapor, a bad smell, or from an imbalance of the body's humors. Your best weapon against this invisible foe is soap and water. So you set about your work with a fierce, determined diligence. You take a bucket of water and a sea sponge, and you begin to clean. You move from cot to cot your self-appointed mission to bring a little hygiene to this pit of despair. You dip your sponge into the bucket and gently wash the grime from a young soldier's face. He sighs with gratitude. You move to the next man and use the same sponge and the same water to clean the edges of his suppurating wound. You think you are providing comfort. In reality, you are a vector. You are taking the microscopic particles of infection from one man and personally delivering them to the next, a diligent, well-meaning angel of death. The surgeons are no better. In fact, they are the generals of this invisible army of pathogens. You watch the head surgeon, a man of immense skill with a bone saw. He finishes a messy amputation, his hands and forearms slick with blood. He moves to the next operating table, wiping his hands and his instruments, the scalpel, the probe, the forceps on the front of his apron. That apron, stiff and dark, with the accumulated gore of dozens of operations, is worn as a badge of honor, a testament to his experience. The concept of a biohazard hasn't been invented yet, so it's just considered a strong fashion statement. He might give the instruments a quick rinse in a basin of water that is already pink and cloudy before he makes his next incision, introducing the germs from the last patient deep into the flesh of the new one. You are taught to look for signs of healing that to a modern eye are blatant signs of raging infection. A surgeon might peer into a festering wound, see that it is filled with a thick yellowish-white cream, and nod in satisfaction. Good, he might murmur. Laudable pus. You hear the term again and again. It is a genuine medical belief of the time that this kind of pus is a sign the body is successfully expelling the bad humors, a necessary and healthy part of the healing process. Historians still argue whether the concept of laudable pus was a genuine, albeit mistaken medical belief, or simply a coping mechanism for surgeons to rationalize the near-universal infections they were powerless to prevent. Either way, you're told this horrible effluent is good. You're not quite sure what's so laudable about it, but then again, no one is pinning a medal on you for cleaning it up. Your very tools are a betrayal. The primary dressing for every wound is lint, a soft, fluffy material made by women on the home front who painstakingly scrape threads from old linen sheets. It's absorbent and soft, but it is also completely unsterile. You pack this fluffy, germ-laden cotton into open wounds, creating a perfect, warm, moist nest for bacteria to flourish. You watch in helpless confusion as a simple flesh-wound wound a man should have survived begins to change. The edges turn a dark, angry purple. The sweet, rotten fruit smell of gangrene begins to rise from the cot. The soldier, who was cheerful yesterday, is delirious with fever today. You are watching hospitalism, the catch-all term for the infections that rage through these wards, killing far more men than the bullets ever did. The tragic irony is that the solution is tantalizingly close. In England, a surgeon named Joseph Lister is just a few years away from pioneering the use of carbolic acid as an antiseptic, a discovery that will revolutionize surgery and save millions of lives. But his work won't be published until 1867, 2 years after this war is over. The knowledge is just over the horizon, but you are stranded in the dark ages of medicine. Your personal hygiene routine now consists of occasionally remembering to wipe the blood off your own face before it dries completely. It's the little luxuries you tell yourself. You work tirelessly scrubbing floors with lye and changing dressings believing you are fighting the good fight for cleanliness. You are, but you are doing it with weapons that help the enemy. After a few weeks in this place, you have been assigned a new solemn duty keeper of the medical chest. It's not a grand apothecary cabinet, but a simple wooden box secured with a heavy iron latch. It is the heart of the hospital, the sum total of medical science's answer to the carnage of war. When a surgeon needs something, he looks to you. You are the guardian of the cures. The problem is, the cures themselves are often just a different kind of horror. You unlatch the box. The first thing that greets you is the smell, a sharp alcoholic tang, mixed with the earthy scent of opium and other strange chemicals. The largest items in the chest are the big stone jugs. One is filled with whiskey, the other with brandy. This is your primary tool. It is the anesthetic for minor procedures, the sedative for the frantic, the stimulant for the faint, and the liquid courage for the surgeons themselves. Got a wound? Whiskey. Got a fever? Whiskey. Feeling the soul-crushing despair of existing in a living hell? Whiskey. It's the 19th century equivalent of a tech support guy asking, have you tried turning it off and on again? You spend a significant portion of your day measuring out doses of alcohol in a little tin cup, doling it out to men who are in pain or sick or simply terrified. Next to the jugs, in a smaller, carefully protected bottle, is the real prize laudanum, an opium tincture, or perhaps even powdered morphine or codeine. This is for the worst cases, the amputees, and the men with agonizing abdominal wounds. But it is always in short supply, especially after a big battle. You guard it like gold, measuring it out by the precious drop, knowing that when it's gone, the only thing you have to offer for agony is a swig of brandy and a leather strap to bite down on. Then you get to the truly scary stuff. You see a small box filled with heavy bluish pills. This is blue mass, and its primary ingredient is mercury. This is the go-to treatment for a host of internal ailments, especially the rampant dysentery and typhoid that plague the camps. The theory is that it's a powerful purgative violently scouring the disease from the patient's system. For intestinal complaints, the treatment of choice is a dose of mercury. It's guaranteed to clean you out, possibly along with your teeth and your will to live. You give the pill to a suffering soldier as ordered, and you watch as he's gripped by violent cramps and sickness. What you don't know is that you are administering a heavy metal poison. The men who take it, for long enough, suffer from mercury poisoning. Their gums bleed, their teeth loosen and fall out, and they are left permanently weakened. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of mercury-based cathartics like calomel killed more soldiers from poisoning and dehydration than the diseases they were intended to treat. Not everything is a poison. There's a bottle of white powder that is perhaps the most valuable substance in the entire war: quinine. This is the only effective treatment for malaria or the ague, which is rampant in the swampy, mosquito-infested regions where much of the fighting takes place. For the Confederacy choked by the Union's naval blockade, getting quinine is a matter of life and death, leading them to sponsor smugglers and experiment with local herbal remedies like dogwood and poplar bark in desperate attempts to replicate its effects. You know that this powder is one of the few things in your box that genuinely works a small miracle in a sea of toxic guesswork. Deeper in the chest, you find the tools of folk remedies brought into the hospital because they were familiar. There's a tin of turpentine, sharp and piney, a common treatment for chest inflammation or abdominal pain is a turpentine stoop. You'll be ordered to take a piece of flannel, wring it out in hot water, sprinkle it with turpentine, and lay the steaming, pungent cloth on a soldier's belly. The ward fills with the sharp, clean smell, a brief, strange counterpoint to the ever-present odor of infection. Your medical cabinet truly has two main sections: things that make you unconscious and things that are poison. Sometimes you reflect darkly they're in the same bottle. You are the one who delivers these remedies. You carry the cup of whiskey, you hand over the blue pill, you apply the burning turpentine stoop. You follow the doctor's orders because they are the experts and you are just a woman with a desire to help. But you see the results. You see the men weakened by the cure, their suffering compounded by the very thing meant to alleviate it. You close the lid on the pathetic box of cures, the heavy latch clicking shut. You came here with a vague notion of healing. But now you understand your job more clearly. You are not a healer. You are a manager of symptoms, an administrator of poisons, armed with a toolkit that is often more dangerous than the diseases you are trying to fight. Sooner or later, you get a promotion. There's no ceremony, no change in your meager pay. The promotion is simply a look from a surgeon and a jerk of his head toward the operating table. Congratulations. You're no longer just cleaning up after the surgeons. You're now an active participant. The pay is the same, but the nightmares are about to get much more vivid. The operating theater is often not a separate room. It might be a designated corner of the ward, partitioned off with a stained sheet, or it might be set up right outside in the open air. The table itself is often just a door, taken off its hinges and laid across two barrels. It is permanently stained a deep dark brown, and next to it on the ground is a pile, a gruesome growing pile of discarded arms and legs. You try very hard not to look at the pile, but it is always there. Today's patient is a boy from Ohio with wide, terrified eyes. His leg is a mangled ruin below the knee. He is a victim of the war's most brutally effective piece of technology, the Minié ball. Unlike a traditional round musket ball that might punch a clean hole, the Minié was a cone-shaped soft lead bullet that flattened on impact, spinning and tumbling through the body. It didn't just break bones. It shattered them into dozens of tiny pieces, tearing muscle and flesh beyond any hope of repair. The surgeons know that to leave the leg on is to invite the near-certain death of gangrene. Amputation isn't a choice. It's the only answer. The surgeon's toolkit is laid out on a small cloth. It looks less like a set of medical instruments and more like something from a butcher's shop or a carpenter's bench. You see a saw, and you hope for a moment it's for wood, but you know it isn't. There are knives of various sizes, long metal probes, and a thick needle threaded with heavy silk. The boy sees the tools, and what little color was in his face drains away. "Give him the cloth," the surgeon grunts. Another assistant takes a rag and pours a bit of chloroform onto it. The patient is given the rag and told to breathe deeply. Sometimes it works, and the man sinks into a slack-jawed unconsciousness. Sometimes you just get a very dizzy, very strong man who really doesn't want his leg sawn off. In this case, the boy's eyes roll back, and he goes limp. For now. Hold his shoulders, the surgeon commands you. And you, he says to a male steward, hold his hips. Don't let him move. Whatever happens, you take your position. You place your hands on the boy's shoulders, feeling the thin, wiry muscles beneath his sweat-soaked shirt. And then the surgery begins. Historians still argue whether the speed for which Civil War surgeons were famous was a sign of profound skill and a mercy to the patient, or a brutal necessity that often led to mistakes and overlooked internal injuries. All you know is that it is terrifyingly fast. The surgeon takes a long curved knife. In one smooth, practiced motion, he cuts a deep circle through the skin and muscle of the boy's thigh, well above the shattered knee. The boy, even in his stupor, arches his back with a muffled scream. His body jerks, and you have to throw your full weight onto his shoulders to hold him down. This is your job. You are not here to comfort, to soothe a fevered brow. You are a human clamp. You are part of the machine. The surgeon peels the flesh back, exposing the white of the femur. He picks up the saw. The sound is one you will never forget. It is not a clean, sharp sound. It is a wet, grating animal noise, a rhythmic, high-pitched rasp of steel on bone. Zzz-rip, zzz-rip, zzz-rip. The entire table vibrates with the motion. The boy thrashes against you, his unconscious mind reacting to the deep, primal violation. You hold on your knuckles, white, your teeth clenched. You stare at a spot on the ceiling or the wall, anywhere but at the source of that terrible sound. You might hear the phrase biting the bullet, and while some men are given a leather strap or a piece of wood to clench in their teeth, the reality is that most of the biting is done by the assistants trying to hold back their own horror. It's over in less than a minute. The saw breaks through the last bit of bone. The surgeon drops it, picks up the severed leg, and tosses it onto the pile outside. He then grabs the arteries with forceps, ties them off with silk thread, and slaps the flap of skin back over the raw stump. Sometimes they cauterize the wound with a red-hot piece of iron from a nearby fire, the hiss and smell of burning flesh adding another layer to the sensory nightmare. The boy is carried away to a cot to wake up to his new reality. You are left standing there, your arms aching, trembling, from the adrenaline and the exertion of holding him down. Your own shirt is damp with sweat. You have crossed a new threshold. You have not just witnessed the horror. You have enabled it. You have used your own strength to hold a boy still while he was systematically dismembered. You know it was to save his life, but that knowledge does little to quiet the echo of the saw or the feeling of his desperate struggle, a phantom vibration that will stay in your muscles for a very long time. The horrors of the surgical table are loud, fast, and unforgettable. The rasp of the saw and the desperate cry of the patient are branded into your memory. But as the days turn into weeks, you learn a terrible truth. The saw is not the primary killer here. For every man you hold down for an amputation, you will watch 2 or maybe even 3 simply waste away in their cots. You came here expecting to tend to noble wounds, the kind you get from a heroic bayonet charge. Instead, you have become an expert in managing various shades of diarrhea. It is far less glorious than the patriotic songs suggest. The great grim fact of this war is that it is fought on 2 fronts. The first is the one you read about in the papers, the one with generals and battle plans. The second, far deadlier front is fought right here in the wards against an army of diseases. Roughly 2/3 of all the soldiers who die in this war will die without ever sustaining a significant combat wound. They will be killed by the camp, by the water, by the man in the next cot. The most common enemy is not a soldier in a different colored uniform, but your own bowels. Chronic diarrhea and dysentery, the runs or the flux as the men call it, are a constant debilitating plague. It saps a man's strength, leaves him hopelessly dehydrated, and makes him vulnerable to every other sickness that floats by. The most terrifying charge in this camp isn't from the cavalry. It's the desperate stumbling charge of a dozen men heading for the overflowing latrine trench. Your job becomes a ceaseless Sisyphean task of cleaning soiled bedding and clothes, trying to spoon broth into men who can't keep anything down, and watching them grow more gaunt and hollow-eyed each day. The whole hospital is shrouded in a particular sour odor that you learn to associate with this slow, humiliating way of dying. Then there is the king of the camp diseases, typhoid fever. It begins quietly. A soldier complains of a headache of aches and chills. You might think it's just a passing cold, but the fever doesn't break. It climbs day after day until the man is lost in a rambling delirium, muttering to his mother or thrashing at unseen enemies. As you change his bedding, you might notice a faint spattering of rose-colored spots across his abdomen. It is the disease's calling card, and you learn to dread the sight of it. It means his intestines are ulcerating, and soon he will likely begin to bleed internally. You have nothing to fight it. You can only place cool cloths on his burning forehead and offer him sips of water, knowing that you are merely a witness to a fire burning itself out. Even childhood sicknesses become monstrous killers here. Measles, a nuisance back home, is a death sentence for thousands of soldiers. Boys from remote farms and isolated villages who have never been exposed to the common illnesses of city life have no natural immunity. The disease rips through new regiments with terrifying speed, leaving entire companies too weak to even lift their rifles. The measles itself might not kill them, but it leaves their lungs ravaged and weak, clearing a path for the pneumonia that follows, which almost certainly will. Historians still argue whether the high rate of disease in the Civil War was primarily due to the medical ignorance of the era or to logistical failures in providing sanitary camp conditions for such massive, unprecedented armies. It's a distinction without a difference for you. You see the filth of the camps, you know the water is bad, and you know from your pathetic box of cures that you have nothing to stop the tide. Sometimes the sickness is not of the body, but of the soul. You will see a young soldier, perhaps one who has witnessed a particularly horrific battle, simply give up. He will stop eating. He will lie on his cot, staring at the ceiling, unresponsive to your questions or encouragement. He has no fever, no rash, no obvious wound, but he is fading from the world all the same. The surgeons will look at him, shake their heads, and in the logbook they will write a single word for the cause of death: nostalgia. In your time, it is not mere homesickness. It is a recognized and often fatal medical condition. It seems a gentle, almost poetic way of saying that a boy has died of a broken heart and a complete lack of sanitation. You look across the ward at the end of a long day. A few men are propped up their stumps, wrapped in fresh bandages. They are the survivors of the loud war. But most of the men are just lying there, consumed from within by an invisible enemy. You realize the greatest threat to this army isn't a gray-clad soldier with a rifle. It's the water, the flies, the filth, and the profound, crushing despair of it all. Your life is no longer measured in days of the week, but in a cycle of relentless, grueling chores. The drama of the operating table and the quiet terror of the fever ward are punctuated by long, exhausting hours of pure mind-numbing manual labor. This is the daily grind of grime, a Sisyphean struggle against the forces of decay. And it is a battle that you begin before the sun is even up. Your first thought upon waking on your lumpy straw mattress is not of your patients, but of the laundry. The laundry pile is your arch nemesis. It sits outside the hospital, a monstrous breathing mountain of soiled linen, blood-stiffened wool, and pus-stained bandages. It's a multi-story testament to human suffering, and you swear it grows when you're not looking. It's the only thing in this war that truly has reinforcements. The work involves hauling buckets of water from a well or creek water you know is probably contaminated, but it's all there is. You build fires under enormous blackened kettles, and you spend hours plunging your arms into the scalding gray water, your hands already raw and chapped from the harsh lye soap. You scrub and wring and beat the filth out of the heavy fabrics, the smell of blood and sickness rising with the steam, until your back aches and your vision swims from the smoke and exertion. From the laundry, you move to the kitchen, another generous term for what is essentially a collection of open fires and blackened pots. Here, your job is to create something edible, or at least digestible, from the Army's notoriously grim rations. You are given barrels of hardtack, a flour and water biscuit, baked to the consistency of fired brick. You are given crates of salt pork, a stringy, fatty meat so heavily cured it's more salt than protein. Your culinary challenge is to turn this into nourishment for men with fevers and festering wounds. You spend hours boiling the hardtack into a lumpy porridge-like mush called skilly-golly. You soak and boil the salt pork for hours to make it palatable, creating a thin, greasy broth to spoon into the mouths of the invalid. Your resume is getting really impressive. It now includes expert lice hunter stale biscuit gourmet chef and professional washer of things you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. Sometimes there are miracles. A wagon might arrive sent by the U.S. Sanitary Commission, a massive civilian organization dedicated to improving the soldiers' welfare. Opening one of their crates is like Christmas morning. Inside, you might find things you've only dreamed of. Precious onions, potatoes, barrels of pickles to ward off scurvy real coffee, or even condensed milk. These moments of relief are a lifeline, a tangible reminder that a world of cleanliness and proper food still exists somewhere beyond this nightmare. Then there is the war on vermin. This is a battle you fight on your patients and on yourself. The hospital is teeming with lice. The soldiers call them graybacks. They live in the seams of clothing and the bedding in everyone's hair. Part of your daily routine is the grimly intimate task soldiers call reading one's shirt. You take a patient's uniform and painstakingly search the seams, crushing the tiny insects and their nits between your thumbnails. You do this for man after man, and at night in the privacy of your cramped corner, you do it for yourself, fighting back a feeling of profound, crawling shame. The rats are just as bad. You've stopped being scared of them. Now, you just give them names. The big one-eyed rat, who boldly stole a piece of hardtack from a sleeping man's hand, is named General McClellan because he's bold, but ultimately ineffective. Historians still argue whether the monumental efforts of nurses and aid societies in tasks like laundry and cooking were more valuable for their practical hygienic impact, or for the immense psychological boost they provided to the common soldier. As you stir a pot of bubbling mush, your eyes stinging from the smoke, you're not sure you know the answer. You only know that it is work that must be done. It is the texture of your life now, the rough, greasy feel of a dirty uniform, the grit of cornmeal under your fingernails, the constant maddening itch of a louse crawling on your scalp. You finally collapse on your cot At the end of another 16-hour day, too exhausted to even dream. The war, you realize, is not just a conflict of ideals or armies. It is a war against the fundamental nature of this place, where everything from the body of a wounded soldier to the very air you breathe is in a constant state of putrefaction. You can't win this war. You can only hold the line for one more day. When the backbreaking labor of the day is done, a different kind of work begins. The fires under the laundry kettles die down, the surgeons have put away their saws, and a relative quiet descends upon the ward, broken only by the chorus of coughs and moans. This is the time when the men are most alone with their thoughts, and when those who know their time is short reach out. This is when you become a scribe, a confessor, and a keeper of last words. A boy from a farm in Pennsylvania, no older than 17, beckons you with a weak hand. His breathing is shallow, and his eyes are glassy with the knowledge that he will not see another sunrise. Ma'am, he whispers, his voice barely a rasp. Would you write a letter for me? You pull over a small crate to sit on, balancing a precious sheet of paper on a book. You open your small ink pot. You're suddenly very grateful your mother made you practice your penmanship for all those years. You just never thought you'd be using it to describe 10 different ways to die peacefully. This is a common request. A significant number of the soldiers, especially those from rural backgrounds, are illiterate or can barely scrawl their own name. You are their voice. You are the fragile bridge connecting them for one last time to the world they left behind. So you dip your pen and you listen. He doesn't speak of glory. He doesn't dictate grand pronouncements about the noble cause for which he is dying. His final thoughts are small, specific, and heartbreaking. He asks you to tell his mother he is sorry for the time he took the good fishing hook and lost it in the creek. He asks you to tell his father that he was never scared. He wants his little sister to have his whittling knife. His voice falters, and he asks you to add that he reads his Bible every day. You write it down, even though you know the Bible he clutches was a gift from a visiting chaplain just yesterday, and he hasn't had the strength to open it. And this is where you learn another of your new skills: translation. You become a master of compassionate fiction. The boy is dying of typhoid fever. His body is rail thin, and the cot he lies on is filthy. But you do not write this. You write, he is resting peacefully, and his thoughts are of home. He might die in a fit of delirium, cursing the war and the God who abandoned him. In the letter, this will be translated to his passing, was a gentle one, and he spoke fondly of his childhood dog. It's called creative nonfiction. You are trying to provide the only thing you have left to give the illusion of a good death, the 19th century ideal of a lucid, peaceful transition surrounded by loving care. Historians still argue whether the heavily edited comforting letters written by nurses on behalf of dying soldiers were a compassionate final gift, or a disservice that shielded the home front from the true horrific nature of the war. For you, there is no debate. You will give this mother the kindest lie you can craft. Once the other men see you writing, the requests multiply. You move from cot to cot, a silent ghostwriter for the dying. You take down messages of love for sweethearts you will never meet. You record deathbed confessions of small sins. You promise to deliver final goodbyes. You become an unwilling vessel for all their secrets, their regrets, and their love. The work is emotionally devastating, but at least you think with a sense of grim irony. The clients are very quiet. More than just writing letters, you become a surrogate. For a boy from Georgia, Dying 1,000 miles from his family, your hand holding his becomes his mother's hand. Your presence is the only shield he has against the terror of dying alone in a strange and terrible place. They die while you are talking to them, while you are giving them a sip of water, while you are simply sitting by their side. Their last breath sanctifies the air around you, and you feel the weight of their departure settle upon your soul. At the end of your shift, you have a small, neat pile of folded, sealed letters. You will give them to the chaplain in the morning to be sent with the mail. Each one is a compact tragedy. Each one is a life of family, a future all extinguished and condensed down to a few lines of ink on paper. You thought the physical exhaustion of the laundry and the cleaning was the hardest part of this job. You were wrong. This is the heaviest thing you have to carry, the silent crushing weight of all these last words. You've learned to navigate the landscape of death and disease, but there is another more subtle battlefield you must master: the hospital's social hierarchy. You are not just fighting filth and infection. You are fighting for a shred of respect in a world run by men who are not at all sure you should be here. On top of that, you are under the watchful eye of a system designed by a woman who is in her own way as formidable as any general. Let's start with the surgeons. They are the undisputed kings of this domain, and they move through the wards with an authority that is absolute. Many of them are brilliant, and they work with a speed and stamina that is nothing short of heroic. They are also, for the most part, deeply skeptical of you. The head surgeon treats you with the same warmth and respect he reserves for the furniture, only the furniture doesn't get blamed when a patient dies of a disease he can't cure. In his eyes, and in the eyes of many of his colleagues, you are a sentimental amateur. Your attempts to provide comfort, to talk to a lonely soldier, to try and procure a palatable meal, to ensure a man has a clean shirt, are often seen as frivolous distractions from the real work of sawing off limbs and dispensing mercury pills. You might gently suggest that a particular boy seems too weak for the harsh purgative he's been prescribed. The surgeon will either ignore you completely or fix you with a withering stare and ask when you received your medical degree. You learn quickly that your opinion is not welcome. You are there to be a pair of hands to follow orders without question and to be as unobtrusive as possible. Your compassion is a liability. Your intuition an insult to their science. Then there is the other end of the spectrum, the force that allowed you to be here in the first place, the long arm of Dorothea Dix, a tireless reformer who had championed the rights of the mentally ill. Before the war, Dix was appointed the Union's superintendent of Army nurses. She fought ferociously to get women into military hospitals, but she did so under a set of notoriously strict conditions. To be one of Dix's picks, a nurse had to be over the age of 30, and to put it bluntly plain, she insisted on it. You also had to adhere to a rigid dress code, somber, inexpensive dresses of brown or black. No hoops, no bows, no jewelry, no curls. The goal essentially was to look like a plain mobile rock. It was the height of wartime fashion, designed to ensure that you offered no hint of frivolity or temptation to the soldiers and doctors. Historians still argue whether Dorothea Dix's famously rigid standards for her nurses were a necessary measure to ensure professionalism and protect the women from scandal, or an overly puritanical policy that excluded many compassionate and capable young women from service. You don't have the luxury of academic debate. You just know that when one of her inspecting agents A stern, hawk-eyed woman, you and the others privately call a dragon lady, sweeps through the ward. You'd better have every blanket folded and every button on your drab dress buttoned. She will criticize you for sitting on a patient's cot, seeing it as improper familiarity rather than an act of comfort. She will question why you spent time fanning a feverish patient when there were floors to be scrubbed. Caught between the dismissive arrogance of the surgeons and the rigid puritanism of the nursing administration, you learn to be clever. You learn that to do your job well, you have to operate in the margins. You become a master of the hospital's informal economy, a practitioner of contraband compassion. You might divert a small portion of the precious whiskey ration not for a surgeon's refreshment, but for a dying man who needs its comfort. You learn to hoard. When a box from the Sanitary Commission arrives, you might squirrel away an onion or a few potatoes, saving them for a boy with scurvy whose official diet is just hardtack and salted beef. Getting an extra blanket for a shivering boy requires the same level of strategic planning and stealth as a cavalry raid behind enemy lines. You are learning to navigate a complex political landscape where your primary goal, the holistic well-being of your patient, is at odds with the goals of those in power. The surgeons want to fix a machine. The administration wants to maintain moral order, and you just want to ease the suffering of a human being. So you smile meekly at the surgeon. You nod obediently to the dragon lady, and then when they have passed, you slip that hoarded piece of real bread into the hand of a grateful soldier. It is a tiny rebellion, a small necessary act of treason in the service of kindness. You've learned to navigate the hospital's brutal routines and its rigid personalities. But now, a new and chilling element enters your world, one that turns every interaction into a potential risk. After a recent skirmish, the wagons bring not just boys in blue, but also a number of prisoners in tattered gray and butternut. The enemy is no longer an abstract concept miles away. He is now lying in the cot next to the boy from your own state, and your mandate is to care for them both. This is the so-called Brothers' War, and you are now standing directly on its fault line. You approach the cot of a captured Confederate soldier, a young man with fiery red hair and a shattered arm. You bring him a dipper of water, just as you have for 100 other men. But this time you feel the weight of eyes on your back. The Union soldiers in the nearby cots fall silent, watching you. The steward making his rounds pauses for just a moment too long. Your simple act of mercy is being scrutinized, measured for some hidden meaning. You learn to have a carefully neutral expression. Too much kindness to a rebel prisoner, and you're a spy. Too little, and you're a monster, betraying the very compassion that defines your role. It's a very fine line to walk for someone who hasn't slept properly in 3 days. The prisoner himself is wary. He looks at the water, then at you. His eyes narrowed. Is it poisoned? Is this some kind of trick? He eventually drinks, but the moment is heavy, with a mutual, unspoken suspicion. He asks you where you're from. It feels less like friendly chatter and more like an intelligence-gathering mission. You're tempted to tell him you're from Mars just to see what he writes in his report. The air in the ward grows thick with whispers. Rumors travel faster than any fever. You've all heard the stories of the famous female spies, women like the Confederacy's Belle Boyd, or the Union's own Elizabeth Van Lew. These women were masters of disguise and deception, using their perceived innocence to gather vital military intelligence. The knowledge that such women exist casts a pall of suspicion over all of you. Suddenly, your presence here is not just a matter of mercy, but a potential security risk. That quiet nurse who keeps to herself could be a clandestine operator. That new woman who arrived last week who can really vouch for her. This paranoia seeps into the most mundane tasks. You might be writing a list of needed supplies for the chaplain. You write down 10 yards of white linen, 6 spools of black thread, 4 dozen buttons. You pause pen hovering over the paper. You've heard that spies use coded messages, seemingly innocent requests that carry secret meaning. Could black thread be a signal for something? It's a ridiculous thought, but you can't shake the chill it sends down your spine. You scratch it out and write dark-colored thread instead. Suddenly, knitting a pair of socks feels like a high-stakes espionage mission. Are you sure that's a drop stitch? Or is it Morse code, for the general has a cold? You try to focus on your work, on the shared humanity of your patients. The boy in gray cries out for his mother, just like the boy in blue. Their wounds bleed the same color, but providing comfort is now a political act. Historians still argue whether the compassionate care provided by nurses to enemy prisoners was a significant factor in post-war reconciliation, or if it was largely an isolated phenomenon, with most prisoners facing neglect or outright hostility. You aren't thinking about reconciliation. You're just trying to clean a wound without having your loyalty questioned by the Union officer in the corner, the one who is recovering from a minor injury and has appointed himself the ward's unofficial counterintelligence agent. He watches you change the dressing on the Confederate soldier's arm. The soldier, his face pale with pain, manages a whispered, "Thank you, ma'am." You give a slight, non-committal nod. As you walk away, you can feel the officer's glare on your back, cold and sharp. The hospital, once just a place of suffering, has become something more complex. It is a microcosm of the nation itself, a house divided full of pain, mistrust, and the constant unnerving fear that your neighbor or your caregiver might be your enemy. Your compassion has made you a suspect, and you must now navigate the war on 2 fronts, the one against death and the one against suspicion. Amidst all the blood, fear, and grief, there is another more mundane anxiety that gnaws at you, a quiet worry that feels almost shameful to admit. The simple, grinding problem of money. You are a patriot, a caregiver, an angel of mercy. You are also perpetually, hopelessly broke. The United States government, in its wisdom, has set the official pay for its female Army nurses at $12 a month. That comes out to 40 cents a day. For this, you face down death, disease, and despair. You perform back-breaking labor for 16 hours at a stretch. You act as surgeon's assistant laundress, cook confessor, and janitor. And you earn less than the private soldier who at $13 a month already considers himself criminally underpaid. You're paid 40 cents a day for your troubles. It's just enough to make you feel like you're not a slave, but not enough to ever afford a ticket home. It's the perfect amount to keep you trapped. That's assuming you even get paid. The Army's bureaucracy is a vast, inefficient beast. The paymaster, who is supposed to make his rounds every 2 months, is often delayed by bad roads, active campaigns, or simple paperwork chaos. It's not uncommon for you and the other nurses to go 4, 5, or even 6 months without seeing a single cent. You are working on credit, on a promise from a government that has far bigger concerns than your personal solvency. You have become rich in experiences, mostly traumatic ones. In terms of actual foldable money, You're pretty sure the lice in your hair have a more robust financial portfolio than you do. This poverty is thrown into sharp relief by the presence of the camp sutler. The sutler is a civilian merchant who follows the army operating a large tent that serves as a kind of traveling general store. His tent is a beacon of temptation. Inside, you can see all the small comforts of the life you left behind. Jars of hard candy bolts of calico fabric, tins of peaches, real coffee writing paper that isn't rough and yellowed. The sutler has it all, but at prices that are spectacularly inflated. You walk past his tent and see a bar of real fragrant soap for sale. The price is so high, you're pretty sure it was carved from a diamond by angels. You make a mental note to just keep using the harsh government-issue lye soap that removes both the dirt and your fingerprints. You need things. Your one good pair of shoes has a hole in the sole, and walking on the damp, filthy floors leaves your foot perpetually cold and wet. The thread you use to mend your drab functional dress is running out. You need to buy postage to send those dozens of heartbreaking letters you write for the soldiers. These small expenses, which would be trivial back home, are now major financial crises. You are expected to be a figure of maternal comfort and stability, but you are living on the absolute knife edge of poverty. Historians still argue whether the low pay for female nurses was a deliberate devaluation of women's work, or simply a reflection of the era's widespread belief that nursing was a charitable calling, not a formal profession. Standing here with holes in your shoes, the distinction feels meaningless. You know the male stewards and hospital orderlies whose work is far less demanding than yours earn more. You know the government can find millions of dollars for cannons and gunpowder, but can only spare a few dimes a day for the women who have to clean up the mess. So, you make do. You learn to patch your patches. You write your own letters home on scraps of paper. You watch the soldiers getting their pay and gambling it away on a game of cards in a single night, a casual display of funds that you can only dream of. You came here to make a sacrifice for a noble cause, and you are. But you never realized how much of that sacrifice would be a simple, constant, humiliating lack of money. It is an insult layered on top of the injury of it all, a final wearying burden in a life already overloaded with them. The war ends. The news comes first as a rumor, then as a confirmed fact, spreading through the hospital like a sudden cleansing fire. Lee has surrendered at Appomattox. It's over. For a moment, there is a stunned, disbelieving silence, followed by a weak but heartfelt cheer from the men who are strong enough to make a sound. The frantic, bloody purpose that has driven your life for years evaporates overnight. The hospital begins to empty. The men who can walk limp home. The others are moved to more permanent facilities. Soon, you are told that your services are no longer required. You are given your back pay, a train ticket, and a formal letter of thanks from the government. And then you go home. The journey is a strange, dreamlike inversion of the one you took to get here. The world outside the train window seems impossibly green and peaceful. The towns are not burned-out husks, and the fields are not littered with the debris of battle. You are returning to a world that tried its best to pretend the war wasn't happening, and you are bringing the war home with you packed away inside your head. Your family greets you with tears and embraces. They call you a hero. They tell you how proud they are. But they look at you differently. You are thinner, your skin weathered. Your hands are rough and chapped, not the soft hands of the daughter they remember. There is a hardness in your eyes, a distance they cannot cross. They try to include you in their lives. Your mother complains about the rising price of eggs, and you have a sudden vivid flashback to a 17-year-old boy begging for his mother as he dies of dysentery. You've discovered you're not very good at small talk anymore. You find that your highly specialized skills of identifying gangrene by smell and holding down screaming men during amputations are in surprisingly low demand back home. The life you left, the one of church socials and needlepoint, feels like it belongs to a different person. You feel like a ghost at your own family's dinner table, an alien who has seen too much and can explain none of it. The physical scars are real enough. You may have a persistent cough that never leaves a souvenir from the pneumonia that swept the wards one winter. Your back might ache with a deep, permanent throb from the endless lifting and scrubbing. But the deepest wounds are the ones no one can see. The doctors have a new name for the condition they see in so many returning soldiers' heart. They describe men with palpitations, shortness of breath, and a constant nervous anxiety. You recognize the symptoms in yourself. You have nightmares. A thunderstorm sounds like cannon fire. The smell of a Sunday roast can suddenly transport you back to the sickeningly sweet smell of a wound cauterization. You have a vast library of ghosts in your head. They don't pay rent, but they are very demanding tenants, always showing up at the worst possible moments. The whole nation is grappling with its grief. You hear talk of spiritualism, of seances, and mediums who claim they can contact the dead. Your neighbors might attend one desperate to hear a final word from a lost son or husband. The thought of it makes you feel cold. You have no need for a medium. You are already a living archive of last words, the true and terrible final thoughts of men you can never forget. There is no therapy for what you feel, no support group. You are expected to be grateful the war is over, to be happy you are home, and to quietly put the horror behind you. Historians still argue whether the shared collective trauma of the Civil War created a more resilient national character or left deep, unhealed psychological wounds that continued to affect American society for generations. You are living proof of the latter. You are a walking, breathing casualty of the war long after the treaties have been signed. The country may be at peace, but the war inside you has no armistice. It is a conflict you will have to fight for the rest of your life in the quiet, lonely watches of the night, long after everyone else has forgotten the cost of the victory. Years pass. You live a quiet life, the echoes of the war, a constant low hum beneath the surface of your days. You are a ghost in your own home, a veteran of a war no one fully understands. Then one day, you are reading a newspaper, and an article catches your eye. It describes the construction of a new city hospital. It boasts of its modern design, with large, airy windows, for something called ventilation, and separate pavilions to isolate patients with infectious diseases. It seems they finally realized that putting a man with measles next to an open wound was a spectacularly bad idea. You'd like to think your generation's quiet suffering helped them figure that out. As you read, a slow, profound realization begins to dawn. The absolute, undeniable horror you endured was so immense that it couldn't be swept under the rug. The stories that trickled back from the front, the reports from the Sanitary Commission, the sheer staggering number of deaths from disease, it all forced a national reckoning. The country had seen the abyss, and it had to change. You see another article a few months later. A training school for nurses has been established at Bellevue Hospital in New York City, modeled on the modern principles of Florence Nightingale, whose work in the Crimean War had been a distant inspiration. They will have textbooks, lectures, and standardized training. They will wear clean professional uniforms. You think back to your own training of baptism by fire that mostly consisted of not fainting and learning to outrun rats, and you allow yourself a small, grim smile. You suppose your methods won't be on the new curriculum. You and the thousands of women like you were the pioneers, the unwilling test subjects. You were the chaotic, messy first draft that proved beyond any doubt that a better way was not just possible, but essential. Your ignorance, your well-meaning, but often fatal mistakes, your desperate improvisations in the face of overwhelming need, all of it created an undeniable case for reform. Historians still argue whether the Civil War was the true birth of modern American medicine, or if it merely accelerated changes that were already slowly beginning to take shape. From your quiet parlor, the answer seems simple. You were there when the old way shattered, and you helped clear the rubble so something new could be built. This knowledge doesn't erase your scars. It doesn't quiet the ghosts, but it gives them a sliver of meaning. You find you have little patience for the trivialities of polite society, but the war has forged a core of steel within you. You hear of women, other veterans, other nurses, mothers who lost their sons gathering to fight for new causes. The right for women to vote. The movement for temperance to curb the scourge of the alcoholism you saw so much of. You find yourself drawn to their meetings. After 4 years of fighting filth disease and military bureaucracy, arguing with a politician seems like a relaxing afternoon hobby. At least the meetings have better refreshments. You look down at your own hands. They are no longer the soft hands of your youth. They are chapped and worn, the knuckles thick, the skin etched with the memory of lye soap and coarse linen. These hands have been soaked in blood and water and tears. They have held the dying clean the sick and written the last words of boys who would otherwise have been forgotten. They are the hands of a survivor. And you realize with a deep and wearying certainty that they are the hands that helped build a future. The cost was unbearable. The pain was immense, but it was not entirely in vain. It was the terrible necessary price of a lesson the nation had to learn. And so your part in the story comes to a gentle close. The memories of the ward, with its constant sorrowful sounds and its heavy oppressive air, begin to soften now, their sharp edges blurring as they recede into the quiet landscape of the past. The weight of all those last words, the burden of all that you witnessed, is not yours to carry any longer. You can release it, letting it drift away on the soft current of time, fading like a lantern down a long, dark road. Feel the quiet of your own room, returning a gentle and welcome silence that belongs only to you here in this present moment. The journey is over. The hardships you endured were part of a story that is now told, its purpose served. Now there is only the peaceful dark, the soft weight of your own blanket, and the easy rhythmic cadence of your own breathing. Let each breath guide you further away from that distant shore of history, deeper into the calm and restful sanctuary of your own sleep. There are no more duties to attend to, no more sorrows to absorb. There is only this stillness, this peace. Allow your thoughts to dissolve, to become as light and as formless as clouds, drifting slowly, peacefully into the deep and welcoming quiet of your dreams. Sweet dreams.